Hello everyone, it's me, Heidi, and welcome to my channel, Heidi's Corner. Now, tonight I have a panel of myself and four lovely ladies to discuss what it's like to be a trans feminine or trans woman in 2020 and as well as 2010s. We'll be touching on what we talked about last time with Jenny, as well as then, but also to focus on 2010s and 2020, what it's like now. Now, I think we could go on an introduction round. Jen, many viewers know who you are, Jenny, but could you go give it another go? You're muted.
Sorry, I was trying to
It's
be
okay.
good and not talk over you. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Morgan. I'm from the United States. I transitioned back in the 70s. I've been just living my life. Actually, the vast majority of my time since transition was living a very stealth life. Um, for a variety of reasons, I decided to come back out publicly as transgender. Um, Maybe 5, 6 years ago because I saw so much going on socially that was hurting trans people, and it's a fight I could not ignore. I had to be part of it. So I got re-involved, and I've learned a huge amount, and I am so completely impressed with all the trans people I meet nowadays. You're all just an amazing group of people. That's not something we had in the 70s. We were all taught to get away from each other, to separate, to not be together, because it was dangerous. And it's not quite that dangerous today. It's still not safe, but it's not like it was. So I hope you have a good show. I'm going to mostly be listening today because these guys got so much more to teach you than I do.
Okay, shall we go to Susanna then?
Yeah, I'm Susanna Viljama. I'm the secretary, art director, and a board member of Transfeminines organization. I'm from Helsinki, Finland, and I started transitioning about 5 years ago. And in the 90s, I was dating a trans woman, and I felt that it was so much bullying you had to undergo that it took me 2 decades to come in terms with myself and start transitioning. And now I'm a volunteer in Transfeminine and Trasec organizations.
Okay, shall we go to Tanya now?
Yeah, thank you, and hello everybody wherever you are on the network. Yeah, I'm Fanny from Knorring. I'm the chair of Transfeminines, of registered trans organization in Finland, like Susanna is also the secretary. So I'm the chair, and we are both actually the founding members also in a way. And in addition to that, I have been quite active in recent years in many trans organizations, the national LGBTI, but also perhaps the most demanding work and also the most giving was to be the co-chair of Transgender Europe and Central Asia, TGEU, which I was 30 months and just left a couple of weeks ago for work. And I wanted, when I transitioned the final time in 2017, to see that the following generations should have much more easier to do that they would not see those problems we have encountered. And now when I say we have encountered, I'll refer also to Jenny because he started in 1970s. I came the first time out of the closet in the 1980s, 1984, and was able then, in a very limited environment in Helsinki, Finland, with an academics or the University of Helsinki uh, to be myself, but then much more in Manhattan, New York, where they had in the Tribeca and Greenwich Village in the Lower East Side many clubs which I frequently developed in those days, and they made a framework for me on which I grew up then later. And unfortunately, I was appointed to a very high-ranked state official, so I had to go back for most of the time, not the private time of my life, to the closet and to be able to do that work. It was a very male work inside aviation, actually. And then I had some family and I had the opportunity to be an airline manager also for 8, 10 years and 8 years in other transportation before I finally did so that hey, I'm dying before I have a final transition. And so it was many times I tried to do that, but finally then in 2017 I came out. And yeah, we are today, and I'm sitting with my in Tampere in a home where I have another transgender woman who started 2 years before me. So that's my wife, current wife. You're a happy couple. And nice to be on the show. Thank you very much, Heidi, for inviting to this great show.
Thank you, and I'm glad to have you on. Shall we go to Trans Atheist now?
Hello, everyone. My name's Katie Sykes. I'm also known as a trans atheist on YouTube. I've been a trans woman for 11 years now. I've accepted myself, but I've only just recently started going through the transition due to personal issues. I'm also an asexual as well, so a little bit different there than most, I would say most trans people are, or most people in general are. As far as work and that, I'm not currently working. I work on my YouTube channel which is unrelated to trans issues, but that's what I do for a living.
Thank you so very, very much. And her channel is linked in the description box down below, if I remember correctly. And if it isn't, it will be there after the stream. So we had a previously last time with Jenni, we talked about the entire, well, not the entire, but plenty of what was going on back in the 70s and 80s, and how it kind of sparked the glam rockers and Freddie Mercury and so on. That sparked the what we have, the culture we have now. So perhaps Tanya, you mentioned that you initially you mentioned 1984. So could you talk us through that time, maybe the rest of the 80s and 90s? We had the new legislation, I think 2002 and 2003 regarding this.
Finland
So could you walk us through briefly what went on between the time you came out, between this 1984 and then when this legislation came into effect in early 2000s?
in Finland it came so late as 2003. You have to remember Sweden was the first in 1972, followed here in Europe by Germany in 1981, and some other countries then in the late 1980s, early 1990s. For example, the Dutch legislation, which was the whole legislation, came out in 1985. They were, of course, all very transphobic as such, as they required forced sterilization and very long requirements of psychiatric research. Is all things that I wish will go to the garbage bag of the history as soon as possible. But on the private level, and or the, let's say the social structural level where we live, of course I had known since the age of 8 that I'm something else, and perhaps ago, at least at the age of 15, I was sure about that. In the 70s, but then it was very forbidden, of course, and it cannot come out anywhere. So I'm happy that, for example, Jenni came out in the late 70s. But in the 1980s, there was new winds coming up, and I think my also first coming out in the public in 1984 was in the autumn when the big news was such a Sky Channel, the first satellite channel with new winds. You could see very much the queer scene from other sides of the world, which you had never had any chance before that. It was also a financial and economical time of growth, very fast growth, the whole end of the 1980s. That meant that we got new winds in form of pizzerias we had never had before that here in Finland, or Indian restaurants or something like that. So you follow, there was something very new in the air, and also that meant that it was quite acceptable actually, at least in the very small uh, downtown areas of our capital, to be yourself for a while. But I'm speaking for a while, and that reflect the same reflection we could see in many of the world capitals. Berlin, Stockholm had its good parties then, and overseas New York, at least New York or San Francisco, of course, has had all the time something going on, but on another level. Uh, and that was also our possibility to come out, those of us who had the possibility to do that, because of course it was a financial requirement to be able to travel overseas. It was not $100 bargain flights like nowadays or before the COVID, but it was quite an investment every time. And it meant also that you pushed yourself a little bit over the limits in a way to be able to be yourself, but you were never sure that you were on the sure side when you were out. Even in New York, I think it was officially forbidden to be a transvestite looking or going close to the opposite gender in those days. Still in 1980s, I think they ended the local legislation first by 1990. So there was, it had its things, and of course the environments where we passed a lot of our time were completely other than in current days. Especially I'm thinking on the Lower East Side and Alphabet City, where the hardest clubs, where you could be yourself, were. They were also the drug dealers' environments. So you were quite scared when you came to these. In Finland, the time passed by and the economic recession in Europe came by the early end of the 1980s and early 90s. And that meant, of course, that also the more conservative winds, value conservative winds, spread all over. And it was kind of an end of what we have seen. In the legislative means in Finland, you could at least by the early 90s, due to let's say a kind of a misjudgment by the legislative power, for 4 or 5 years you could do legal transitioning of your legal gender by contacting a certain person in the magistrate, the governing office in Helsinki, and have your gender corrected if it was wrong. The person in question was a member of the national LGBTI community. And but that was for 4 or 5 years. Before that, we needed 2 weeks in a hospital at least for psychiatric researches, and then a special permission by the castration committee, which was the same that was used for deaf and other peoples in those days. We had a lot of these eugenic principles in Finland, unfortunately valid until the early 1990s. So very few passed there. And another problem was, of course, the information. There was no internet. Nowadays, the young who are feeling that they might want to do a transition in kind of right, seeking word on Google when they get 2 million answers. Went to the library and found one book where they was saying that yes, you are mentally ill. It was completely other times. That is something that we nowadays often forget. And I have got so many questions that why didn't you do it 30 years ago? Well, I knew that somewhere in the other parts of the world, for example in Switzerland, there was a private clinic that for $300,000 or you could have your SRS done. But of course, that was the same price that for an apartment, 2 or 3 room apartment in downtown Helsinki. So it was out of all question for us completely.
Jenny, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Did you say $300,000?
Yeah, it was Swiss francs actually, 300,000 Swiss francs in 1989. So,
Well, I wonder what that would convert to.
Dollars.
That,
Yeah, it was
I
a
mean,
little bit less. Yeah, I think it was like $200 or $150,000 perhaps. Because I think remember the Swiss francs was between the Finnish mark and the dollar. So. Yeah, that was a ridiculous amount. So it meant also that also was who thought about that. Well, in Thailand you could do, of course, in those days already you had the knowledge, but you were quite scary for the medical standards there in Thailand in those days. Now they have, of course, augmented enormously since then. So that was really.
But I know that in the 90s there were mailing lists in the early form of the internet in Finland. There was a subphone list that included a group for trans women back then, and they had some support for each other that way as well.
Yeah, that came then in 1990s, but that was first with the 1994.
Yeah,
in 1994, but before that we didn't do anything. So, but
yeah, before the internet, I remember a few bulletin board services that were specifically trans oriented.
Actually, and even Prasek was so. Our national oldest organization for trans people that is founded in 1984 was so, let's say, behind any kind of information wall that very few acknowledged the organization as such. And I was actually in Denmark already then in contact with the transvestites organization, Greenway Club, because they were much more open, so you knew about them. I didn't join them, but I followed them at least. But I knew that this is not my organization anyway. Even I later became member there, but
what was it? What was it like for you guys on the street at that time? I mean, in day-to-day life, going to the grocery store, going to a bar, going to a movie. How were you treated? How did it work out?
In daytime, you could not much do. There was some who did that, yeah, but in the evenings.
In the 90s, it was pretty okay. Actually, surprising okay. Yeah. So my partner, for example, went to the gym with me and swimming with me, and had no problem using the women's locker room, even not having undergone any operations at all. And I'm surprised that people had problems in the 2020s or 10 in Finland.
Yeah, it listening to this conversation, it seems as if all this fuss about, well, not fuss per se, but it seems as if all the locker rooms, as Susanna mentioned, and such, have come a bit later. It seems as if they weren't. Well, of course they were there back in the 90s. Yeah, of course it was there, but it wasn't as bad as it. At least it seems to be.
Yeah, and like with the U.S. laws, and unfortunately, we have also a proposition now for sexual harassment law, which includes something like that. But I think it was also that people knew about us, so they could not expect us to be there as trans. If you passed as a woman, then you were just a woman, perhaps a little bit male-looking woman. Yeah. That's what I think. What people thought. But the more information they got, and especially the more transphobic information, because those started also quite fast, the anti-gender movement. and so people have realized that hey, they are something that we should watch for, and I think that has made the problem. That has created actually the problems. I don't think that people themselves created the problems.
Yeah, I, 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 please go on, Susanna.
Yeah, if you compare Finnish, for example, feminist movement to other countries, terms, for example, are quite much shown in Finland or Finnish feminist circles. Usually they have to keep their mouth shut about their transphobia, and they have tried to form their own feminist groups for that, and usually people don't join it that much, which
Yeah,
has been a pleasant surprise for me.
yeah, I was about to go to trans atheists now. As we've discussed these Susanna mentioned the ladies' locker rooms and Tanya, and as well as the bulletin boards from 90s, as well as Jenny from a bit further back. How do you view all this um, availability of information maybe now, and as well as maybe 10, 15 years ago when it comes to trans information, and finding out that yeah, okay, there are others, this is not sick,
Well,
etc.
back in the cave dweller period that I'm from, there wasn't any information. You know, you could go to the library, public library, and dig through the card catalog, and you might find 4 or 5 different books that were out there somewhere. You'd have to order them in special. Not every branch of the library would have them. They weren't terribly long, terribly involved, and then they were by people like John Money, who was completely wrong about everything. It was the only information you would find is if you actually ran into somebody physically who was trans, or if you happen to know a medical person or a social services person that was involved with it, and could get you Xerox copies of information and things.
Yeah,
it was just not there.
yeah. So how is it in the UK now? And you trans atheist, you said you came out or identified at least as a trans woman 11 years ago. So how was it 10, 11 years ago, or a bit before, maybe 10, 15 years ago? This finding out information in the UK.
Well, back then, like 11, 12 years ago, it wasn't. It wasn't something that was in public knowledge. Not many people, especially in my area, didn't really know that it was actually a thing that anyone could be. Even my doctor, when I first went to my doctor back then, turned around and said to me, "Oh, that's disgusting. That's absolutely disgusting. I've never heard of that." And
Really?
that's a medical practitioner that said that.
In the 90s?
This was 2007, 2008, something like that.
Holy
Horrendous.
fuck!
Absolutely horrendous. So how did you come?
This is really shocking. You know, I don't know. You know, it's got to be partially just my own bias, but I've always looked at Europe as being like way more advanced socially than the United States, and this is just the complete opposite of that.
Yeah,
In general, Europe is far more progressive, far more tolerant. Unfortunately, trans atheists, you just had one dipshit of a doctor. Unfortunately.
It also doesn't help the area that I live in. Obviously, like I live out in the country, so in the countryside, I don't live in the city. In the city, it's a lot more open, and obviously everybody is very accepting. But if you're not living in a city, then it's a much different world. There's a lot. The people are a lot cliquier and a lot more conservative.
Which doesn't really help to have a doctor like that in the village, or or a small town wherever you live. I'd like to take a right now. I'd like to take a comment from Microraptor. One problem for me is that my family only wants to talk about trans people as people who struggle. It's so hard to be trans, and it seems like that's all there is to it. What your thoughts on this, ladies?
Well, that's very common with this question of a family. They want to see the person, it's the old person that has a being. And unfortunately, many of us share very similar memories. But I think to be yourself and to tell that no, we are not struggling. We are struggling just for our rights because the majority is against our rights. So we have to do that until we have our rights, until we are just as any other woman, man, or other person. Come on. And I understand very well the question in such. I also have similar feelings and thoughts from my family. And they are hard, and yeah, you feel very bad when you hear that. And it's just try to keep yourself on the track and say, okay, I'm my son. It's not a question of struggle. I'm struggling with the forces. I'm trying to be myself, and it takes time.
Thanks. Jenny, what's your take on this? Susanna, did you have
Um,
something first?
yeah, I have
Okay, your
about
take on this,
three
Susanna.
things.
Okay,
Um,
go
um,
on.
Three positive things because I'm in trans. First of all, I've gotten to know a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have known otherwise, or I would have had to study a lot from mostly first-hand experience from the hormones and how the treatment shifts from gender to another, but not only from me, but other transgender people I know and work with. And second, you don't get to for example, the toxic men, if you're dating men, you don't get to experience them at all. Because if you're trans, they're going to drop you out of them selection anyway. And if I was a cis woman, I wouldn't have that much of a chance as a vocalist. For example, I can sing male vocals and female vocals, and I can act male and female vocal roles as well.
That's excellent. Excellent points, and I I really double those. I mean, I can especially that because I'm trans, I have experienced many things that I could never have experienced if I weren't trans, and it's it's so wonderful. It's not. I know it's some people, as Microraptor indicated, that they want to talk about as trans people as just as people that struggle, but we aren't all struggling. Of we have our struggles, which are different to each to other trans women and cis people. I mean, all of us struggle. So those, as for to those people who see us as just people who struggle, I said screw you.
Yeah,
So
I've got a point on what
so
Microraptor
what's your
was
take,
saying.
trans atheist?
Yeah, I've got a point on what Microraptor was saying. I think it's quite related to the fact that this stigma with it, we're just people that struggle. I think it's quite related to the fact that we view it as a medical condition. And yes, it does need medical treatment but it's an identity that requires medical treatment. Being trans is not a medical condition in of itself.
It's a yeah, it's a form of gender, uh, a form, way we've come to be. So Jenny, you had some
Yeah,
points on this.
yeah, I got a bunch on this. I understand where Microraptor's family is coming from. Very, very much so. The only knowledge they've had of trans people prior to you coming out to them was what they learned in the media, and the media's image of us back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s was just like they'll talk about in the film Disclosure by Laverne Cox. If you haven't seen it, go see it. Um, all these just horrible negative, you know, trans people are cross dressers and pedophiles and blah blah blah, and, mass murderers and all kinds of really good things. Um, but in the 80s and 90s, at least in America, we started getting talked to by afternoon talk shows and some of the evening talk shows where they would actually sit down with trans people and talk about their issues to a limited degree. It was still, what can we talk about that's somewhat salacious so we get a better audience. But at least they were talking about us in terms of um, how we're being treated in society, or what we have to do to maneuver through society. Um, I think we would all do a lot better if society, if the cis world would just sit back and realize that we don't need treatment because we're trans. We need treatment because of the way you people treat us.
Mm.
Yeah, indeed. Uh,
In Europe, it was quite unknown when I comment this question that you would have on TV any kind of afternoon shows with this kind of questions. There was no. I think they came first in the 1990s with the new winds after the economic crisis that ended about 95, 96, and the economic crisis. Before there was again a new, of course, before that 9/11. But so if I look at back at the 1980s, it was very phobic writings now and then in the newspapers, but like you can see still, of course, today. But there was not so much discussion. And with the new winds which I was describing, there was at least some places you could feel safe. But like I said, they were small, and if you went out of them, you could perhaps be as long as nobody understood that you are not a woman.
yeah.
It's a woman. What they thought you are.
Uh, hey, Kerry Mac. Hello.
Carrie,
Sorry, Nikki. Hang on. There, Nikki. Hello. Sorry about that. My bad. Okay, now. Hey, Kiri. It's okay. Don't worry. Um, I was thinking on getting switching on the trans atheist now. We before we went on, we had a brief discussion regarding the court decision of banning the blocker treatments in the UK from youngsters under the age of 16. How do you see trans atheist? How do you see the current atmosphere regarding this topic, or do you have, or how much do you have on this anyway?
Well, actually, I don't really have much on it. I've been busy over the last few weeks with other stuff, so I haven't actually kept up to date with this new story. But it's a terrible decision that they've made. Obviously, when it comes to transitioning, the best time of life to be able to transition is before puberty hits. Now that isn't always possible. So children having these blockers to put puberty back is a very, very important step for some people to be taking, and to be banning that's just going to make a lot of people's lives a lot harder than what they need to be.
Now, I'd like to take this a bit further, and to perhaps take around maybe give us a little peek of how much blocker treatment would have helped and changed your life in the sense of being trans, and if they were had they been available, would your life be any different, or would it be the same? Shall we go from
Each of us?
yeah, each of you.
Oh God.
How would it? What would your life be like, and would it be any different? Susanna, you're muted. Muted.
Could you
Okay.
repeat the question? I was just answering to the chat at the moment.
Mhm.
I forgot to say that even if there's struggle in transitioning, it doesn't mean it's going to happen forever. For many, it lasts mostly during transitioning.
Yeah,
But
there we have it on the screen.
Yeah.
The reply to it. Okay, so shall we take it from so yes, let's continue from what we were going on about. So maybe Susanna, what's your take on would your life be different, and if so, how, and would it be just the same fabulous way you're going on about now?
a fabulous way in compared to what before transitioning.
Before transition, and
yeah.
maybe what would it be? What would it be like? Yeah, if any different.
For me, it was a tough call to start transitioning because I had read about trans people who were suicidal before transitioning, and many say that it's a route that you should choose only if it's an only alternative to suicide. And I wasn't suicidal, and I was afraid that I would regret transitioning. But I eventually found some other people who had regrets, who were suspicious about transitioning, and as I got the diagnosis, I was sure that this is going to be the right route. And it was a struggle transitioning, and it took years to get to the point that I'm feeling okay, I'm loved, I'm in a relationship, and I got family, and I've got a career, and I've got friends. But I wouldn't be as sufficient or successful as I have been unless I had transitioned, because I wouldn't know that much that I do, and I was partly holding myself back. And people who have known me before transitioning and after that, they say that I'm much more open and not as strict person or laid back person.
Okay, and trans atheist, what's your take on this subject?
Yeah, it's quite a tough question, really, because it's you don't know unless it actually happens to you, do you? Really?
No.
I would say it would have made a big difference in some areas of my life, but then in other areas it probably wouldn't have made that much of a difference. But I'd say the areas that it would have made a difference in would have been very key areas, especially to transitioning.
Good points. Jenni, perhaps could you go?
We didn't have puberty blockers back when I transitioned, or if they did, nobody heard about them. If spironolactone, for example, even existed, I don't know if it did back then. It certainly wasn't recognized as something that could do puberty blocking, or testosterone blocking. I think we should say. Had I had those prior to puberty, yeah, they would have made a huge difference. I wouldn't have shoulders so wide I could support a house. You know, I wouldn't have had developed a voice that took 2 years to learn how to talk right. It just would have been huge. Puberty is a vicious, horrible thing to put a kid through when it's the wrong puberty. It's traumatic. Every moment of it is. from the first pubic hair you spot till you're a full adult, whatever the hell that is in terms of puberty. Um, and for them to do this to the children, it shows that their disdain for children. It shows them their disdain for medical treatment. It shows their bias to supporting transphobes. This group didn't even have a single trans person or medical person who treats trans people testify. Not one. The only people they had were transphobes and non-transgender people to testify. What the hell did they learn based on that? They only learned bigotry. So yeah, it would have made a huge difference. And I'm a very strong supporter of the availability of puberty blockers for any transgender child, and I think they should be probably given out much more liberally than they are.
Mm-hmm.
But, I understand the conflict people are having, but the conflict should be between the parents, the child, and their medical team, not the freaking government.
Exactly. So I agree. Now, Tanya, what's your take on this?
Well, I must say that what Jenny said, she took my words already. Because we are in a way perhaps the same generation. So yeah, of course, life would be completely different if they would have it. Actually, I heard in the late 1980s of blockers, and of the first time at all that was possible to get any kind of hormone treatment, actually. So it took a very long time, and well, by the end of the 80s, I was almost 30 years old. I'm born 59. So it was like too late, yeah. So it's a hypothetical question for me completely, this question. But like you said, Jenny, it's something that we should make available for the youngsters and for before puberty already. In Finland, unfortunately, it's practically very hard to get them before the age of 16. And now the new legislation, if we will get at least the prime minister, which is worldwide known currently, our female young prime minister, has said unfortunately on the news 1 year ago, quite exactly on the day, that she doesn't see that the new legislation will apply to anyone under 18. So we have a lot to do here, and I think it's not only we, but it's also worldwide. And
this deciding body also classed the puberty blockers they use, like spironolactone and what's that other one? I'm sorry.
Yeah, they're coming from of course, the government.
Well, they classed them as experimental drugs.
Yeah.
Well, they've been used for a long time to interfere with hormone production for cancer patients and various things like that, or for precocious puberty children.
Yeah.
They're not experimental. They're just not.
Yeah.
This is just more bigotry.
How shall we convince the leaders of the social welfare units, because it's they who charge, and the social minister of health and social affairs in every country? That's practical those who are sitting behind these decisions. Politicians do not know. They are thinking in some let's say, pink clouds about these ideas. They get very selected information. So it's something we have to work on, not only in Finland. The whole Eastern Europe is currently now almost a catastrophe. It's going backwards all the time. There you cannot change your legal gender anymore in Poland and Hungary and so forth.
Oh God.
Yeah. So we have a lot of problems, but it's also when I'm looking at the United States. Canada has a better situation in that, but you have state-wise very different situations. You have states that you cannot do it, like Arkansas or some in the Midwest states. They're impossible to change your gender there. And then you have very liberal parts like Oregon or California.
I'm going to re-educate you on that.
Yeah,
the Midwest is nothing like you think. I'm technically in the Midwest. I grew up in Wisconsin, next door across the Mississippi River, and did my transition there. I didn't have to go to one medical board. I changed my legal stuff all by myself. I walked into the court, dealt with the judge directly, wrote my own legal papers. I wasn't in a program or nothing. I just did it, and I lined up the professionals as I needed them.
Yeah.
I could have,
Okay.
had I been able to afford it, I could have done the whole damn thing within 5 years.
But for example, in the
Yeah,
south, it's
Yeah,
not
it's
hard.
kind of it sounds a bit well, quite a bit far off from what I've heard, what the U.S. is now. So that I think we could move on, maybe a bit on this theme back to maybe the 90s with Susanna. You mentioned of having a transgender partner back at the 90s. So
Excuse me.
how do you view that era from your own perspective, and then going in the 2000s, getting the legislation in place in Finland?
Well, first of all, I felt that back then it would have been much better if there were any peer support groups for partners of transgender people. For example, I had seen other transgender people in the TV in some documentaries, but I had never heard of anyone being in a relationship with a transgender person, and you had to be stealth, so I couldn't talk about it to anyone. And I thought that I was about the only person in the world, and I sported to transphobic attitudes, and I'm not really fond of how I worked in that relationship. But we're okay with my ex nowadays, and she says that she wasn't that adult either. But I'm just sad that there wasn't any support groups back then for the spouses. And nowadays I have had good feedback from other people who have participated in those groups. And regarding life as a transgender person back then, well, she got her diagnosis and the hormonal treatments from a private physician, and she managed to get her judicial gender changed in the late 90s. And you had, like Tanya said, you had to spend a fortnight in an asylum and get an admission for castration back in the days before 2003, when the first transgender law was published.
Mm. So how did that like affect your life going forward, or when you knew there actually was a structured procedure of how to proceed with this problem, then going forward and eventually getting the strength to transition?
Well, first of all, I was really traumatized because I was bullied and I had experienced a lot of physical violence at school. I was autistic, and I couldn't even face my emotions when I started dating with a transgender woman, and she was my first partner. So I had no experience of dating life or anything, and suddenly I was in a situation that I had no knowledge and no instruction on what to do and how to deal with this situation. I was bullied for dating her, and my family didn't accept that well, and I had some inbuilt hatred or disgust about myself and the feelings of being transgender, and I tried to not think of those things. And 10 years after, I started feeling that there's a feminine side of me and I can't escape that. And at that time, it felt that it's difficult to combine the idea of being transgender and feminism. For example, the feminist ideal is that if you're a man, it doesn't tell what you're able to do or how you're able to dress and so on. Until I heard about gender dysphoria, that I hated that I looked like a man in a dress. And it was something that I need to pursue. And it was my new partner that I told that I'm not completely a man. I'm something in between these genders. And they were non-binary and proposed me that I should perhaps go to the gender identity clinic and the support groups and try to find out if I'm really transgender. And in the notice, I had seen some friends of mine who were openly dating other transgender people, and it was such a surprise to me that it's completely okay to be public about being trans, and you're gonna date someone and that's okay, and you don't get bullied for that. And even cross-dressers who were out, and someone tried to mock them, and their friends were supporting that cross-dressing person and attacking the person who was bullying them. And I noticed that after the notice, there was a significant change in the social structure, possibly due to the social network or something like that. I don't know, social media. But general acceptance got a lot better after the notice.
Thanks. So maybe trans atheists now. Do you have? Actually, I'm a bit dumb for not checking, but pre-stream. But do you know when you got the similar legislation in the UK, or at least in England and Wales, that enabled this gender reassignment process in some sensible way?
I'm not 100% certain, but I think it was sometime in the late 90s that we got
Right.
that
Yeah,
in
I
the
know.
UK.
It was. We have a little bit different between England and Scotland and Wales. England and Wales, I think, have the same. Scotland different legislation.
Mm.
So, could you? What would the process have been like pre-legislation, like prior to what you have now? That what the legislation brought to you, that you have now available to you, that that enables your transition.
It's mostly the rights. So so before the legislation, you were still able to go through with the gender reassignment surgery, go through but it was a lot more psychiatric based than what it was now, what it is now. It's more the rights that go along with your ability to live as a trans person that we have now. And so before you weren't able to get a gender recognition certificate, whereas legislation allowed us to be able to apply and legally become our preferred genders.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Of course, we have three Finns here, and we all know what's been going on in Finland in recent years regarding the trans legislation. But perhaps Susanna or Tanya could walk us through what the current situation is like, and where it's likely to be heading in future, in say coming next 5 to 10 years, legislation wise.
Yeah, the current situation is actually that we are one of the few, actually the only Western European country on the Transgender Europe rights maps that is red. And that means that we have the legislation which came from the 1st of January 2003 and 4 requires 1 year at least of practice of psychiatric tests, then 1 year of real life test, which means that you have to live according to the other gender you are applying for, but with wrong papers and still in the old mode. And also a forced sterilization that can be a chemical such also. That means that's actually this is hormone treatment. And this has got already by the European Court of Human Rights has given 2017, and now to the Finnish government that this should be changed immediately, but we have had two governments who have done nothing to that question. The first had the problem that there was a Conservative Party or ultra-conservative party, the Real Finns, and then the Christian party, which were against it. And then with the current bottomless Mrs. Marin's government, they didn't do either nothing. Uh, they didn't even appoint a committee. There has been only one committee since that has discussed three different models. One that would be very much similar to the most liberal ones, such as Norway or Malta or Ireland. And the second model enforces the Danish model with 18-year age limit and half a year of time of self-assignment that are you really that what you want to be before you give another notice that yes, I want to be myself. And the third model is a little bit more even conservative, but I don't think that is available alternative. The current government has given promises. They are given not speaking. The prime minister is giving nice words of the pride that yeah, everybody should have the right to be as they are, but we are waiting for a committee that will start to work out on the previous committee, which was I think the third in a row already, to do a new legislation, no doubt, to start to do the actual law, which will present it then for the parliament, but so far we have nothing else than promises. If we don't get it during this government, I don't know when, because unfortunately, populistic right-wing Real Finns party is currently in the opinions the largest party, although it's not in the parliament. It's the Social Democrats are in the parliament.
Yeah,
So
the
we have
the
field. We have
yeah
field. Yeah.
yeah we have exactly so we have, but I think what we have now is way much better than we had say 20 years ago, and I have great even though we have the certain political uh, parties and people functioning within them are becoming more prominent. I have great hopes that we will get the new legislation within the next 5 to 10 years. Uh, or what do you think, Susanna, is the fate of whether it be what do you think? What is? I don't think it's a question of whether or not, but I think it's the question of when.
Yeah.
So, what's your take? Is it 5 years, 10 years?
Well, we waited for the change for about a decade, and first it was the Christian Democrats, and then it was the True Finns, or nowadays the Finns Party, and now there's not really a good explanation for why would they postpone or cancel the update of the law. And I think they're going to update it, but they had to give up on some of the ideas. For example, the youth, the underage people wouldn't be considered in the law update, and I hope that it would be solved within the next decade. But I can't say anything. It's difficult to give a good prophecy because, for example, in the previous survey they did, a political survey, the True Finns Party was the most successful, and I'm afraid that they might be leading the next coalition of
Yeah,
the government.
yeah. So,
Can I comment also here? And I think that, like Susanna said, that was abolished for the time being our ideas because unfortunately they're copying very much of the Polish Peace Party or the Fidesz from Hungary that have established an anti LGBTI regime in those countries. So I hope we are not seeing that in our country, but I think the population here is not that ready to go for that kind of political opinion like the party itself is proclaiming. And I think that that's one of perhaps our good prospects when you go out there, people on the general level are very accepting.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
How do
problem
you?
is that most of the people don't understand what the law is about.
Exactly.
Many people assume that it's gonna get underage people the possibility to get the gender reassignment surgery, but it's not about that. And even some associations are spreading false rumors about the law that would you accept underage people to get the surgery, and if not, you shouldn't back the law. But it's not that.
No, it isn't really. It's something a bit different. Trans atheist, how would you view the legal status being as is? How do you see any or is there any pressure of moving forward with the the trans legislation in the UK?
I think the legislation, on a whole, the way it stands in the UK, it's quite supportive of transitioning at the moment. It's just obviously this new law that they've brought out to stop the blockers is for children is obviously going to go in the opposite direction than the way it's been going.
Yeah, but I would assume now that it has caused quite an uproar, not just in the UK, but elsewhere as well, and it's horrible. And I think it will change. They will take it back. They will reverse this decision hopefully at some point. So Jenny, what's the legal prospects of transitioning in the US? Maybe not maybe on state level as much, but in general the federal status. What is it like? You're muted. You're mute, Jenny. You're muted. Yes.
There is no federal legislation that deals with that. The federal government doesn't have a thing to say about your choice to transition or not. The Constitution basically has this clause in it that says if there isn't a law written about it in the Constitution, it's up to the states to decide what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And since there is no constitutional structuring of defining identity or gender or anything like that, it's up to the states to do it. And so there's 50 different ways to do it. Some of the laws are very similar, but there's still 50 ways you got to do it. But generally, the document that's hard for people to deal with is the birth certificate. You don't need the birth certificate to change all your other legal documents in most states. For example, I changed my driver's license just by going in and changing the name when I changed it from renewed it from expiry. And the same with the gender marker. I just changed it from M to F, and I explained to the person at the counter this, and I showed them this letter from my doctor, and they said, "Oh, okay." So they just changed it. Social Security, which is the federal government, I sent them a letter, and again the legal court document for name change, and a letter from the doctor about gender, and they changed it. It was just okay. Wait for the paperwork to show up. So it's for the most part rather painless in the United States to do that. Now, birth certificate is a little harder because it is such a key document in your identity and stuff like that. They do make you jump through a few hoops. I haven't changed my birth certificate yet, but I plan to because I do want to get a passport in case I have to get the hell out of this place. And I have to get a statement from two physicians that I have actually gone through GRS, and that is all legit. So they just want to confirm that this has occurred. It's not giving you permission to do it, but it's confirming that it has indeed happened before they change the markers on birth certificate. And then on some states, they will only update the existing document. Some states will destroy the original document and create a new one. So that varies state by state. So there's really not a legal path that gets in your way here. you, I hate the system I hear everybody describing in Europe. It's going through all these boards and getting permission to transition. Really? and I think it's because you have the social medicine where the government's paying the bill, so they feel that they have the right to interfere and ask questions and make decisions on your behalf. We don't have that here, so there's no board that sits there and says you may or may not do this. If you want to be a girl, be a girl.
Yeah, that reminds me. Trans atheist has in the UK the situation regarding changing your legal documents, the gender marker, getting a driver's license, passport, ID card, a social security card, etc. All the shizzle when it comes to legal documents.
Well, it's quite easy for the most part for most of them. You need to, all you need to do to change your name on pretty much all your documents, apart from your birth certificate, is get a D poll to change your name, and there's no questions asked about proving your gender or anything like that. The gender recognition certificate, what if you get that, then you're able to change everything. So your birth certificate and all of your IDs and everything as well. You don't need to have had the operation, SRS surgery, to get that. You just need to have been attending the gender clinic and been living as your preferred gender for 2 years, and pay obviously a fee to get it.
Yeah.
That's quite a long
in Finland,
time.
yeah, that's quite troublesome. And in Finland, luckily we have the lack of a birth certificate.
Yeah.
We don't have one.
We have actually.
I have one birth certificate in Finland, but it's a historic relic. You don't need it.
Yeah, but it's usually there's some sort of paper going from the hospital to the magistrate's office when
actually,
a baby is born.
Interesting.
But if you want to immigrate to another country, you need your birth certificate, but you can order it electronically from the magistrate or the digital population office.
Yeah, digital population office.
Yeah, but that's a bit different. You don't need to living in Finland. You don't really need one.
Yeah, and it doesn't include the gender information. It's only the date of birth and
name,
I
date of
think
birth,
it's the
etc.
person ID as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the biggest struggle that's going on right now in terms of gender and markers and stuff like that. Is the NBs wanting to have the ability to not say male or female on their driver's license, but have, say, an X or some other symbol that represents, they're not declaring as male or female, that they're NB. And I think that's perfectly appropriate. I wish I'd do that. But again, it's every state's different.
Just the United States situation, half of the states requires allows the gender change on the birth certificate, other half do not. It was interesting. But in Europe, we have also to remember, we are speaking about the problems. There is also many countries that do not have any problems at all. They have a modern transgender legislation. For example, Norway, you go to the taxation office, which is the registrant for everyone, and you just fill in a paper, and the next day you are the gender you wish to be, and that's from the age of 16 upwards, based on your own wish. And Iceland is another, Malta is another island, Portugal. They are all having, and Belgium has come up with that, and Luxembourg, and then France and Italy are coming slowly. They are not allowed. France had to do that because of the European Court change, but it's not implicated the law in such yet. So you have to go there to a private psychiatrist and get a paper that yes, you are what you are, and deal with that. So it's very different from ours, where we have a hospital visits for 1 year only two official hospitals are allowed to do the researches on you here. The university hospitals, Helsinki and Tampere. And then if you are looking internationally, Argentina was the first to, out with Malta to introduce the modern legislation. Argentina is very forward going. In other questions, it's a very conservative Catholic country, for example, uh, concerning marriage or abortion, especially, that is practically not allowed. Another Uruguay, Peru, Ecuador, they are all very modern in their legislation concerning transgender people. And in Asia, Taiwan has come up. And then we have the third marker, which we just said there is the biggest countries are India with 5 million X, or they are E, because they're eunuchs, so they are E on that passport. And Pakistan, Bangladesh, these kind of countries you would never believe that have the third gender in force. In Europe, we have third gender on Iceland, Denmark, and Germany actually also currently. But in Germany, it's only for imperfect people, so the legislation, but they are trying to change now so that it can be free to anyone. And Germany will see probably next year also very modern transgender legislation. So that's a little update about the
Yeah.
situation.
Now I've shown my comment on the screen a few times. Please ask your questions in the chat for our panelists. I think because I think we would be going in maybe 15 to 20 minutes from now, so that we don't have to be here all evening. No matter how lovely this is. Anyway, I'd like to go now that Tanya, you mentioned the third gender marker. Should you now each of you or should you not have the third gender marker in your country? Jenny?
Oh, I absolutely think we should. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't see any reason why say a trans feminine person shouldn't be able to choose that marker as well. The forcing people into the binary is the problem.
Yeah, it is. It's screwed up. Susanna?
I'm just interested in how it would change things that legally separate the genders or sexes apart from each other, like the parent law, for example. I've heard that some transgender men have problems getting some paid leaves or other stuff when they get pregnant and so on. And I have nothing against having the third gender marker or the third official gender, but I'm just interested and curious about how they would solve those problems.
That's a good point. We had a while ago, maybe it was a year or two ago, we had it in the papers that the first public pregnant trans man, which caused quite a bit of an uproar, and this family had really bad troubles with all this parenting laws and certain benefits and such. But I don't know if they got those solved. Anyway, Tanya, the third gender marker in Finland, yes or no?
Of course, yeah, we need
Of
it.
course.
And then, of course, like I said, there is other European countries that have it, and we have currently here a big polemic about our identity number, which is also a social security number, and that's a very binary system. And actually, the EU law already says that if somebody from the other EU country will move here, and if they're just for working for 3 months, they need that kind of identity. They cannot get it now, so. But that's not the only reason to change the system here. But of course, that's GDPR, as we have the general data protection rules that requires that. But that's another question. But yeah, I want it as soon as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. Trans atheist?
Definitely. I think it would solve a lot of certain smaller issues, especially in the UK, things that I've come across and other trans people in the UK have come across. Everything seems to be segregated in society into male and female. Got male and female toilets, male and female locker rooms, male and female the ways of entering a swimming bath, and that is very. It makes for very uncomfortable situations for people in our position.
Quite true. And I've always been pro third gender marker. Ever since I was made aware of it some years ago already. Now, I have a question from Kiri Mack. What are the panel's thoughts on the way media handles news of prominent public figures speaking out about their own experiences being trans or recently discovering they are trans? I think I know what she's referring to. Shall we start from Trans Atheist?
Well, as usual, the media, with anything, they overreact to things, don't they? They try to take what the majority thinks on things and appeal to that, and it just so happens that we're a minority. So
appeal to authority being the logical fallacy. Susanna?
I just have a request for the media that they would try to not dead name celebrities or known people if they are coming out. It's sort of understandable to connect for people to be able to connect them if it's appropriate, but afterwards it shouldn't be that much of an issue. And sometimes the media even misgenders those people who are coming out as transgender. But fortunately, in Finland, they have mostly been corrected if they are being called out for that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so media, if you're watching this, listen to her very carefully. Now, Jenni?
It's a multi-edged sword. Or multi-pointed sword, maybe. It's a pitchfork, is what it is. It's good. It's good that they do that, okay? Because any positive press that we can get, and when you have somebody who seems to be as pure at heart as Elliot Page is, that's good for us because they represent this very clean, comfortable image that mom and dad America can accept and can handle. If it's somebody who's more salacious, then it's not necessarily a good thing for us because of the negative feelings that it may generate. I thought the media did a pretty good job on at least the American media, again, because that's all I see. A pretty good job with not dead naming at all. The person known as dead name Page was barely on my periphery of awareness. I really had no idea who this person was, and so when it came out and the first thing I see about it is that Elliot Page has said they're trans. And I said, okay, who's Elliot Page? So, and somebody had to tell me, oh, okay, I understand now. So everywhere I looked, I saw Elliot. I didn't see the dead name being used anywhere. And that was on day one. And so I think they did a pretty good job this time. They're still doing a terrible job with, say, Caitlyn. What's her name? Kardashian or whatever. Jenner, excuse me.
Jenner.
And I don't know why, but that person gets dead named all the time, even today.
Mm-hmm. Even though it's been who knows how many years.
Exactly, and so. And I should say in the Caitlyn Jenner situation, it's just not the media that's doing that. It's people online. They're just being very cruel and mean towards the person. What I don't like about when they come out with a media person or a celebrity who is announced trans, is it detracts largely from the struggle that each one of us has. That suddenly this trans person in this celebrity, how's it going to affect their Q rating? Are they going to get any more movies or recording
Q rating.
contracts?
OMG.
And they forget that we're all out here, millions of us, and who have been beating our brains out trying to make it through society. And society is now going to bend over backwards for the celebrity.
Yeah, which kind of sucks. Tanya, your take on this?
Yeah, that's true. That's very much what Jenny said, and it's such a very complicated question. We can see it from the moral aspect of the society or the trans movement. Actually, I'm looking, of course, as a representative of the trans movement. It's from there. It has its positive sides when it's questioned, but it also, at the same time, it paints in a way all the transgender people to transgender people if they don't even want to be that, because I know many who have transitioned and they just want to be women or men, and they don't want to hear the word trans afterwards, after the whole process and they are finished. So it's a little bit a question, two-edged sword actually. Of course, it's good that for us right now, when we are struggling for our rights worldwide, it's very important that some people like this Elliot Page, I didn't even have any kind of idea who it was before that. So that's perhaps a generation question here. Yeah. So it's very good, but there is others, and then is of course the moral aspect of the people themselves. Do they always want to be then have a stamp on their forehead that they are trans? I having that because I've been very much out. I was in 13 newspapers on 1 weekend in Finland, presenting all my life, everything I have done, and why I didn't join sex work at one stage, or did I do it, and everything possible. So it's a very hard question. But I took it because I'm an activist, and I have this role. Of course, sometimes I think that would be much more nicer just to vanish as someone and somewhere into the society. And then there is the role of the media. First of all, we have to remember one thing: they need money. Everything that sells is good for them, because without money there is no media. That's very simple. Except the state media, the state broadcasts, which lives on taxation money, but that's only in Europe. For example, in the United States, everything is private. Or the Voice of America is government, the federal. But I don't think
hence the word media sexy.
Yeah, I mean, it's media sexy. You have to have something media sexy that brings you media. Yeah, and then also the object that they choose is a media sexy, and we can see also different who is presented in a women's magazine, who is presented on the television, or already in our little country here, but also larger in Europe, or on different. Like I had to, as teach coacher had to go to a Polish trans site to explain what are the rights, because they needed that against their leading party. So it's very different. And then, of course, we have to remember that there is an old slogan that no news are bad news. So we live on that. Yeah.
Excellent points. Can we have the thoughts on this from trans atheists? All this media, how it handles these things, from Kiri.
Oops, sorry, I missed that. I was.
Yeah, what are the panel's thoughts on the way the media handles news of prominent public figures about their own experiences being trans or recently discovering they are trans? What's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I think everyone else has covered it absolutely perfectly there. I'd mirror the same thoughts that Jenny made.
So I think it's time we love you and leave you, and perhaps we could take closing statements, if you will. If there's something you wish to say, something you didn't say, something you want to say as an encourage words of, if not anything else, maybe words of encouragement on young trans people, struggling trans people, or any other sort of quote unquote closing arguments on this subject. Would you, Susanna, would you like to go first?
Well, I just hope that it gets easier for the youth to get the treatment. For example, the hormone blockers. Right now, they have to get them through a really unprofessional or unofficial route through other countries of Europe, and plus that you can't get your legal gender changed before you're 18, which makes the lives of some teenagers more difficult. Plus, getting the third gender more official and more people more aware about the issues of non-binary people.
Shall we take trans atheist now?
I'd say to young trans people who are, embarking on this journey, sometimes the journey may be hard. Sometimes it may seem like certain parts of the journey are unsurmountable, but it's the journey that makes us stronger. And so go through with it, and you'll come out the other side stronger than what you were before you went in.
Tanya?
Yeah, I was thinking about this last year's more on a general level, and I wish, of course, that the world would be similar as the Norwegian legislation, and that we could start at a very young age, like they're at the age of 6, actually, already, if needed, with hormone treatments and so on, and also the legal transitioning. But there is a very long way. There's just, like I said earlier here in this show, a couple of countries in Europe and perhaps a dozen outside, and there is over 220 countries worldwide, so there's a lot to do. What I'm much more actually feared about in this situation is the East European conservative and populist movement that is growing and seems to grow at the current, and that requires of us too much, on the international level at least, very much forces to try to stop that movement, but also on the national level we have all to work, and it seems to be some kind of international trend at this moment, and that I'm worried for. But for the young, I want to say that, yeah, exactly like Translates from United Kingdom said, just that remember that unified we are together, and remember to be yourself, and if you feel that you have bad, there is always somewhere out somebody of the movement who can at least give you some kind of peer support.
Thank you. Jenny?
There,
Jenny,
there,
your thoughts on this?
there's so much. A proper summation could take another 2 hours. Um, governments need to understand that it is not their place to control people's lives, and they need to learn and understand that they should be seeking information and understanding of us, or really any other um, um, identity group. That we are the best teachers, not people who are upset by us or what we do or what they think we do.
Mm-hmm.
They're being fair and being balanced is not giving every nutcase in the world a platform. If nothing else, that makes everything worse for everyone. And begin to make decisions that are people centered, not rules centered, not domination centered, not let me control you centered. That's all 1800s thinking. It's time for it to go away forever.
Indeed, indeed. And now is the time to love you and leave you for tonight. Now, what I would like to tell you tonight is that you, young trans people, as well as the adults struggling, you're not alone. Please reach out to those online or look up online if there are groups in your area. Obviously, now all the groups are online, which might make it easier for some people to attend these groups. Now, there are links down in the description box down below. There should be a link to Trans Atheist's channel, as well as this channel's email address, and links to 2 Discord servers, LGBT plus safe space server, as well as this channel's own dedicated server. Now, please like and subscribe, and stay safe, stay home. Bye.